Hey guys, and welcome to another episode of Behind the Track with me, Jean, from the band St. Lucia. And today, I want to take you guys through our most recent single, Love You Better. So Love You Better took about 7 years to finish from the point where we wrote it. So Patty and I were in Nicaragua for a writing camp organized by the record label Neon Gold, who was our second record label that we were assigned to. The first one was Heavy Rock Music, the label owned by the Knocks, and we were with them just for the first single that we released, and then we signed to Neon Gold / Columbia for our first album, for When the Night. So they organized a writing camp in Madeiras, Nicaragua, at a place called Madeiras Village. A lot of pop music these days comes out of writing camps, I would say. So basically what they do is, they get a bunch of different writers and artists to come together at a destination, whether it's like a city like New York or LA, or a place like this in Madeiras Village in Nicaragua. And from what I've experienced, it's normally that you're put together with another artist or writer, and you have a day to basically come up with a song. Like write the basics of the song, do as much of the writing as possible. Have a set of lyrics, have the chords, have the melody, and kind of a basic production. Yeah. So basically, we were at this writing camp, and there were a bunch of different amazing writers and artists there. James Flanagan was there, Foxes was there, Georgia Koo was there, What's or Not. And basically it was just like a big party in the jungle, essentially, with some recording and writing. And basically what they had was, there were a bunch of different stations set up throughout the resort, I guess you can call it, although it was more like an Ewok village or something like that in the trees. Most of them were just kind of in a hotel room with just a laptop and like a controller keyboard and Rocket speakers, just like a very kind of basic setup, microphone, maybe one guitar or bass or something like that. But then there was like one room that was like a proper studio that basically each of the artists or writers would have one day to spend in that like nice studio. So on this particular day that we wrote Love You Better, we had access to this really, really nice studio. And I basically woke up with the song in my head, like I dreamt of it. I don't remember exactly what the dream was, but I just remember like dreaming it and waking up, and a lot of the song was in there. Like at least the main chord progression, just that whole thing of dun, 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 and the bass line and the drum groove. And the melody, basically. So just that thing, and this happens to me sometimes. This is like the best case scenario for me for writing a song, because it takes a lot of the work out of writing a song, because sometimes you really have to dig and you got to just try and invent something, and sometimes that leads to something amazing, but often it leads nowhere. And in this case, I was just kind of like gifted this awesome idea. We had a writing session. Me and Patty were put together with an artist called Berson. His name is Jacob. And, I turned up that morning, me and Patty turned up, and I said to them, hey guys, like, we could obviously start something new, but I'll just play you guys this idea that I dreamt of. I literally had this dream. And so I played it for them, and both of them were like, oh yeah, this is like really cool, we should work on that. And so we started working on Love You Better. And to start, it was very easy. Like, I pretty much had most of the arrangement in my head, and we just went through it and recorded a bunch of stuff. And because we had access to the nice studio, we tried to record as much for real as possible. So they had like a guitar amp in the little bathroom, and so we recorded some electric guitar. And I don't know if we recorded acoustic or if we just recorded electric, but they had congas and a bunch of stuff. So we tried to do as much as we could for real. The whole thing came together pretty easily, but the hard part was writing the verse. And I've often experienced this, that if a part of a song comes to me like super easily, like say the chorus just comes to me, or for example with Before the Dive, like the end of the song came to me, and then the first half of the song took me ages to come up with. With this one as well, it was like the chorus came to me, and then the whole verse kind of felt like a struggle to me, because it was a bit more kind of like chipping away, throwing ideas at the wall, seeing what sticks, and we all sort of came together and tried different things. I definitely walked out of the room in frustration a few times, and we had a few moments, but in the end, we had most of what Love You Better is now, like at least song-wise and arrangement idea-wise, was there. This is what it sounded like, so I'll just put on some headphones so we don't get any bleed. Yeah, you had my heart, and you had my mind, but I lost myself down across the borderline.
And it's not to say
Yeah, I don't think I fully had like, I don't think I was fully settled on the lyrics yet, but they're pretty similar to what they are in the end, actually.
But then you brought me back and you made me laugh, and the memory becomes the same. And now I'm holding back, but you forced my hand, and I'm waiting just to hear you say, 'cause in that weather, gonna love you.
That was the electric guitar that was recorded in the bathroom. Well, the amp was like in the bathroom, and I always loved the way that sounded, actually. And then all that cool kind of effecty stuff, that was all Jacob. So that's the biggest difference between this original version of Love You Better and the final version that we released, is that there's no anticipation on the kick. But still feels good. That's the original demo of Love You Better, which, I mean, feels really good. And like, if you consider that we wrote that in the middle of a rainforest, it's kind of like the perfect song to write. It's right where we were, you know, surrounded by howler monkeys and the beach and just yeah, it was definitely felt like a good vibe. We were pretty much in the process of working on what would become our third album, Hyperion, at the time. And I think we had a few we didn't have a clear direction of that album yet, but basically we were just going in a different direction at the time. And we were, you know, Hyperion was emerging, and in some ways I think this felt like a little bit too similar to Tokyo, and I was really pumped on Tokyo because it just felt like just something really fresh in a way, and this felt fresh too, but it didn't really feel like it fit the whole thing. And so then it basically sat dormant for a few years, and then I think at one point we recorded this, you know, properly, you know, in with our setup that we had for Hyperion, which was in the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and this is what that kind of sounded like. I'll just play you guys a little bit. I don't know, it was definitely, we were trying new things, it was kind of progressing, but it never quite got there. And sometimes it's hard to know like when an idea is gonna get to that place that it needs to get to for it to feel done and for it to feel like really solid and like it competes with all the other stuff that you're doing. And at the time it just didn't really get there, even though this says final. And this was definitely not final. This is like, I don't know, 15 versions before we actually had the final. You know, then again, it sort of lay dormant for a while, and then we had this period in summer 2019, where we did a few different sessions at Mission Sound in Brooklyn with the full band. And the process was that everyone would come in and we would try and do like at least record the basics for at least a couple tracks every day. One of the biggest things that's challenging in recording with a live band in the studio is if you're able to capture the excitement of the band kind of playing together and that feeling, like that's very, very hard to mimic, you know, just by recording everything separately. To me, it was like, okay, if we're gonna do this, we have to try and make it feel exciting. And there's always this feeling that I know from if we're rehearsing and I bring in a new song and we play it, and then there's like the moment where it all sort of comes together and it feels super good and super exciting, and I kind of wanted to mimic that in the studio. So basically, I would bring in an idea, I would play it for the band, I would talk them through the arrangement ideas that I had, and they would share some of their arrangement ideas, and we'd try play it through. And we'd do that a few times, and then after a few sort of run-throughs, we'd say, okay, well, let's start recording. And, you know, that was normally 3 or 4 times of just kind of getting our heads around the vibe. The crazy thing is that almost every time we would record a song, we would, like, the take that we would end up using would be roughly like take 6 or 7, like almost every time, because it would sort of take you up until there to really get familiar, you know, it would take you a couple to get familiar with it, and then to get really confident in the thing was like at that point of 6 or 7. And then past that, you would get kind of the law of diminishing returns, where you start to overthink it, or you just get tired, or whatever it is. But that kind of, there's this kind of magical moment where everyone's feeling good about it, everyone's kind of connecting, you're not overthinking it, and it just feels really good. And so that was normally 6 or 7. And so we did that for a bunch of songs, and a lot of the songs that we have coming out over the next sort of year or so were recorded that way. And so we did that with Love You Better. We did one recording where we tried to do it like in this way where we box Dustin off in this kind of like baffle chamber to try and have the drums feel like very dry and tight. But because he didn't have line of sight, like it didn't end up sounding that good. So then I think a month or two later, we did another live band recording and we tried recording the song again. And this time we did it, you know, also trying to baffle it a bit, but allowing Dustin to see us and for us to all be able to see each other. Because that's one of the coolest things. And I think one of the most important things about recording live with the band in a room is you've got to be able to see each other, be able to look at each other and communicate. Like the communication is so important. So then we took that and worked on it for years and years and tried this and that. And I think I even at one point slowed it down a couple BPM because it felt a little too uppity or something, or too fast. It was just like kind of in some way a struggle to find the middle point between it feeling loose and alive, but not too loose and danceable. I feel like people's ears want to hear the like, at least the backbeat, like the kick and the snare arriving at the same point almost every time. And so at some point I was just like, okay, well, I don't want to destroy the sort of magic of the band in the room, but there's this thing called kill your darlings, which is basically like if you have this idea that you're holding really kind of dear, but something's sort of holding you back, sometimes you have to just kill that idea and try something new. So basically I was just like, you know what, I'm going to just try, just for shits and giggles, to just quantize the drums and see how that feels. So I did it, and that was actually the thing that ended up making the whole song like lock in really well. And it's funny because if you think of like, you know, I would compare, you know, to me, this song, there's elements of it that make me think of like Miami Sound Machine and that kind of era. And a lot of that stuff was actually drum machine. And it was actually a very locked in groove. And what made it able to be so funky was that like extreme kind of locked inness. So everything else could be a little bit looser, but it's tied to this very strong kind of backbone of groove. It's very rare that I would do this. There's barely any other songs that I've done this to. Most of them I just kind of like do minimal editing to Dustin's drums, but this one, it just felt like it needed to be super locked in, and we tried it. And then everything came together pretty quickly. You know, a lot of the stuff here in the session, which I have open, this is like the final session before I sent it to Chris Zane to mix. And this isn't Chris Zane's mix, it's just my kind of working mix. But this is like the final production version of it. So some of these things were recorded on that day. So the drums, these claps were recorded by us, a bunch of the percussion. These timbales were Nikki. I guess I'll just take you through some of this stuff. Okay, so one interesting thing I did, and this is something that we often do when we're recording, is when I get Dustin to play drums, even if I'm planning on, say, having the kick and the snare at the same time, like so if you have like doom, doom, like that, I'll get him to not play the kick on the snare because it's really, really hard for a drummer to play the kick and the snare at exactly the same time. And I often find that to really get like the impact, you need to have them at pretty much exactly the same time, in my experience. Maybe other people do it differently, but so I always get him to not play the kick and the snare at the same time, and then I'll just like recreate that in my session. So I'll just like kind of sample replace. I'll just add a kick on each snare that I want the kick to be on, like exactly. So I think in this one we ended up actually using just a kick sample for the kick and not like a live kick. So it's literally just this kick sample, which is this kick sample that I really like. And I'll just take you guys through the drums. So that is the kick. This is the snare. Gated, obviously. Snare bottom. In this one, we definitely relied quite a lot on the samples because it just felt like it needed that really consistent kind of quality to it. So here are the samples. Lindrum, snare. This is like this is one of my favorite snare samples. Our friend and collaborator Andy Baldwin made it back in the day. It's like a very deep snare drum with a good amount of top end as well. And then we of course have the hi-hat mic, overheads, Dick mic, which is basically this mic that sits basically right just above the kick drum, equidistant between the two toms, pointing at basically at the crotch of the drummer, which is, I guess, why we call it the Dig mic. And that just gets like a good kind of blend of all those things, but not too much like room ambience. So this is how it sounds. You still hear the room of Mission sound because it's quite a big room, but still feels good. So then we have mono room, stereo room. So not a lot of like ambience in the drum mix, to be honest. But you know, you can definitely hear its live drums. Yeah, but pretty much quantized, unfortunately. Nothing against Dustin. Dustin's an amazing drummer, but just this one, for some reason, just felt like it needed that like real kind of solid quality to it. And then we have Collapse. This is the whole band clapping together, kind of, I think, pretty compressed and gated, and probably a bit distorted as well, which is what I normally do. To claps. And then over here, there's a little funny section where in the kind of breakdown, and I don't think you hear it that well in the final version, but there's this moment where we're just like fooling around. I don't know, like.
You're like this, you're like. I'm dying. 3.
And then I noticed this moment before where Paddy coughs and it comes again. Because I think I like looped this section at one point and then, I don't know, I didn't notice that it was there. But whatever, that's in the final track, Paddy coughing in loop. Okay, and then we have Nikki Cymbales, of course. Nikki's an amazing percussionist, actually. Put some space echo on it and some spring reverb. Cowbell. So yeah, some of this percussion was recorded at Mission Sound, and some of it was recorded just here in our studio in the stairwell. Yeah, there we have it. Tambourine hits. I always, not always, but I often will have like a space echo delay, like a stereo space echo delay on the tambourine hits to give it a pretend reverb that's actually a delay. Here, I'll show you how it sounds together. So it's just that delay. But in the mix, it sounds like a kind of like a plate or something. Okay, then we have rhythm tambourine, and left. I don't know, in the final mixer it's panned exactly. Didn't use the shaker. I don't think we used the wood block in the end. Of course, Vibroslap. To me, it's like, it always makes me think of like a rattlesnake in the bushes or something like that, or in the forest. Here it comes. With a bit of spring reverb on it. Spring is great on Vibroslap. Some congas. That probably has some spring on it too. Yep, some spring and a bit of this AMS non-lin reverb. This is one of my favorite plugins by U80. Very true to the original. And then CR78, which is this beautiful machine. And it's one of my most recent purchases and used all over our new record. That's the sound. The hat. You might recognize that from Heart of Glass by Blondie, because I'm pretty sure they use the same drum machine. It's exactly the same loop, and it's just in there. So I use that. Okay, and then we have the bass, of course. So as you can see, for like, you know, so I barely use any plugins in my sessions. I'll just show you over here. So if you look, you know, there's like some EQs. Like occasionally there'll be, you know, if I'm just like at the end of the process and I just need to have a delay, I'll use this, or like space echo, or yeah, but it's mainly, you know, and then there's like a couple compressors that I use. Like I love obviously all the original Universal Audio stuff, the plugins by Universal Audio of their pieces of gear. I just feel like they're super good, super accurate. 1176, I love this, the Blue Stripe, the Rev A, you know, de-essers, EQs, but truly like really not many, and barely using any of, like I have these set up as sends, but I never really send things to them. You know, sometimes I'll have like a thing on the drum bus, like a Fairchild plugin. I don't know, just like, but just very, very little. You know what I mean? Like sometimes, like Pan-Man, I use a lot. Things to kind of shift things in the stereo spectrum, but really not a lot of plugins. And I mainly just I do stacks of my outboard effects. I'm very lucky. Obviously, over the years, I've built up a good collection of outboard gear, not like an insane amount, but you know, for example, here with the bass, like I'll just record it line in. Like here's line in bass, and then I'll send it, reamp it through my Ampeg. I don't know if you can see it. This is it here. My Ampeg SP12, add some Dimension D to it as well, for a bit of width, and then H3000 fuzz, which is one of my favorite effects. I use it on almost every bass track, including bass synth. You don't necessarily even hear that fuzz in the final mix. It just adds this width and a bit of dirt to it. So you go bass. And then we have the synth stack. So what I love to do with if I'm stacking synths is to have normally like 2 layers of the same synth at 2 different octaves. And then, you know, so here's just the clean Prophet synth sound. It's the sequential Prophet 10, the new one, which I think they did an amazing job with. So here we have these 2 octaves, and then we have second octave. Normally the second octave a bit lower than the high octave, you know, and then this whole kind of stack of effects like this. Bit of space echo, mono space echo, chorus. That sounds like my H3000 chorus actually. There's a bit of a, like, I love the Dimension D, but it's actually a very like transparent chorus. Like it doesn't like make itself known as chorus, but if I want to have a chorus that is a bit more of like an obvious like lush chorus, I'll use the H3000 preset 242 called Rich Chorus, which I love. So that I think is this. Then we have the Prophet high, and then the high space echo. So it's like a huge stack of stuff that makes up the final sound. And that's when I got my second, when I bought a second space echo so I could have like a stereo setup. And that kind of changed my life because it just, I use space echo almost instead of reverb, I'd say 98% of the time. And it's just, if I just layer like a few different increments of space echo on top of each other, it's basically like a reverb. It has the same effect, but it's less, I don't know, it clouds things up less somehow. So anyway, here we go. And then here's another space echo. Okay, so that's the main keyboard part. And then underneath that, I have, there's like a busier, kind of funkier keyboard part that is played by a few different things. The original was just this whirly. And I think this was played by Nikki. Whirly, and then we have whirly space echo. It's just like a slap, stereo slap. I'll actually just do this. So here, just the whirly. This is just the whirly by itself. With space echo. Longer space echo probably. And Dimension D. And then we have 2 tracks of clav, which I recorded at Big Mercy in Brooklyn. Oh God, just did that. Okay, whatever. So here we go. Bit of space echo, and then that, and that's a real clav going through this pedal, which is, I don't know if you can see it. Can you see it? So going through the Boss Dynamic wah pedal. And then 4 tracks of CP70 as well. It's a CP70. So all of that together sounds like this. Just like a very rich keyboard sound, and if I get rid of one of those, I feel like I miss it. I always try it to see if I miss it or not miss it. And then with the Prophet. Okay, and then now we have, there's like a little, another thing I love to do is like, if I feel like a track needs movement, but like an arpeggio feels like too much, I'll often do something that's just like a 16th note mono synth that's just going on like a note that works across the whole track. And this is the version of that in Love You Better. You know, and it's just panning a little bit sides. It just adds a bit of movement and interest. It's like another kind of rhythmic interest element that's just like in there and feels good. That's it. And there's a Selena is in. That's my Selena string ensemble that I'm, again, very lucky to have. So Selena, sounds like it has a bit of like phase on it. And then here's this like weird sound that that Jacob basically sampled Paddy doing this like mouth guitar thing, which is like, like if you, it's so silly. If you put a bit of like spit in your mouth and you go, it just sounds a little bit like an electric guitar. And we showed him that and he thought it was so funny. And he then just sampled it on his phone. And this is the kind of stuff that Jacob brought to this whole experience. It was like he just had all these cool little tricks that like we kind of record things in quite a classic old school kind of way. But he really embraced new technology and like just would bring weird stuff like this to the table, you know, like that was Paddy's mouth guitar, and there's just some effects. SE is always space echoes. Anytime you see SE, it's just space echo. Cool. And then here's this like xylophone thing. This is also a Jacob thing. But this is just without any of the effects. This is it by itself. And then we have space echo and another space echo and an H3000 thing that creates this sound. So this is kind of like the effectsy section, I guess, of the thing. And then, you know, I'll always add some like transitional effects. And of course, you can see here, I have some stuff from the Oliver pack from Splice, which is just a fucking really amazing Swiss Army knife pack, maybe the best Splice pack of them all. Yeah, so, you know, to me, it's like, obviously, most of what I do, I try and really do it like well and record it well and like, you know, have good stuff, whatever. But then I really believe in like having a few things in there that are just like, you just throw them and you just find them somewhere, you just put it in, and kind of like the 80-20 rule, you know, like I try and keep 80% of stuff like really good quality, like using good analog synths, good microphones, good sources, but then really making sure there's some stuff in there that's kind of like a bit more trashy. Not that this is trashy by any stretch of the imagination, but it's like I didn't like handcraft it, you know? So anyway, these are like some sweeps from Oliver. Here we go. And of course I could have made that myself very easily, but I don't know. There's just something about just grabbing something quick and just throwing it in sometimes, you know? And then transitional effect. And then this is like a thing that Jacob came up with. I don't know how he did it, but this is a really cool kind of rhythmic sweep thing that he did. Yeah, so that's a really cool thing that he did that comes in at times. Okay, and then we get to guitars. And this is, yeah, so often when I record electric guitars, I'll record it just line in first through my preamp, through my EMI TG2 preamp or whichever one I'm using in the moment. And then I reamp it. And this I want it to be like really like a distorted, clearly a distorted guitar sound. Then I'll just plug it straight into the amp. But in this case, I recorded it line in and then reamped it. So here you can hear the line in. That's just the line in sound. And then here's, and then I have a Vox AC30 here and a Fender Twin Reverb, and then I have a box called a Rivera Silent Sister, which is basically a it's like a ISO cab. Basically, it has a amp, like a speaker in there, and then two mics set up that just stay in there, and a cable comes from my amp into there, and it just, and I have it set up that it's very easy to just reamp stuff, which is great. And most of the time, that's all I need. So then this is what it sounds like. Line in, and then I send it out. I'll reamp it through a reamping box like this. This is the one I normally use. And I send it out through, if I want chorus, I'll then send it out through my chorus. And in this case, it was probably my Mooga Fruga Cluster Flux. And then into the amp, and then there you go. That's the amp. That's the second amp microphone, One is a ribbon mic, one is just a SM57, I think. And then a stereo chorus. Give it some width. And then space echo. Just kind of find the rhythm depending on what it is. Sometimes it's a 16th note, sometimes it's an 8th, sometimes it's a quarter note or a third, I don't know. And then all the guitars together, like this. That's pretty good. And then Ross played this awesome acoustic guitar part that is, yeah. This is just the kind of thing, like Ross is just an incredible musician, and there's just things he brings to the table that I cannot do. And this is what's I feel so blessed to work with such great musicians, because they always bring something to the table that, I'm in many ways also blessed that I'm capable of doing so much by myself, but it's amazing to have access to people who really bring something to the table that I can't do, and this is something that Ross can do really well. Like, I could not mimic that, no matter what I did. I can do funky acoustic guitar parts, whatever, but this was just such a beautiful, specific, very world kind of sounding, worldy sounding acoustic guitar part, and this is how it all sounds together. It all together. There you go. All right, now we get to horns, and these horns are played by Mike McGarrell, our saxophone player, Dave Levy, also trumpet player that we work with often, and Jason Disu, who was a very good friend of ours who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, and he's on a lot of our upcoming new tracks because they've all been recorded over many years. And he unfortunately passed away, and he played with us live and on so many records. And every time I listen to this, it makes me so happy, but it also makes me really sad because I miss him. Yeah, so here you can hear the horns. This is the horn part. Recorded at the beautiful room at Mission Sound. It has some good, room sound to it, a bit of compression. Often I will double the horn part if it's a repeating part, but in this case it felt like it was too much if it was doubled. It just felt better to be kind of humble and just three players playing together. And this is something, in my experience, you cannot do with a plugin. Like, you can't do this with samples, horn samples. Like, it's just something about, like, if you go bop, 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 you always hear that the attack kind of repeats itself, and it's a repetition of samples, and this is just beautiful, And I love horns, just always does something. And here's the effects that I added to it. Some space echo. And then we get over to this section, and the baritone horns come in, which was Jason on his trombone and Mike McGarrell on baritone saxophone. Also some effect. There it is in the track. And then the last thing we recorded for the song was this flute. This is literally the last edition. I think Mike McGarrell did it last summer, actually, and this is it. This is his flute. Got some effects on it. There was just something about this that felt like an appropriate addition to the song because it has a little bit of a South African vibe, the song. I grew up in South Africa, obviously, and a lot of South African music like that I grew up with had like a penny whistle in it, and this is quite a common instrument in South African music. And even though this isn't a penny whistle, a flute has, to me, like a similar energy to it. A lightness, shall we say. Cool, and then we get, now we get into the vocals, and yeah, I recorded, my vocal with my RE20, Electro Voice RE20, which is like a $300-400 microphone. I love it. And yeah, and I'll just take you guys through some of the effects. So, and as you can see, yeah, so I use a lot of effects. I stack the effects and create my own effect chain using outboard stuff, mainly Space Echo, but then a few other things too. So here we go. So this is,
well, you had my heart,
it's the dry vocal.
and you had my mind, but I lost myself down across the borderline.
Space Echo slap.
And it's not to say that I didn't feel
Space
that
Echo
way.
slap stereo.
That's
the two Space Echoes. Space Echo 16. And yeah, that's in the middle. Eighth notes, that just sounds like a reverb, right, in the middle. Eighth note stereo.
In December when you can't leave me alone. And it's my pleasure just to
Dimension D for width, obviously. Spring mono.
Till you can't leave me alone. And in bad weather, gonna love
For a second, I had I bought an Ursa Major space station, which is like this very old vintage delay unit, and I had it maybe for a month before I had to give it back because it wasn't working properly. But I recorded some stuff with it, and this is some of the stuff I did with it.
Well, you had my heart, and you had my mind.
Has like a very good kind of non-lin reverb vibe.
And it's not
and then a long space station.
I didn't feel that way. But the silence made me take the undecided
Yeah, that's it. Oh, and then throw delays, of course.
You brought me back and you made me laugh and the memory.
Yeah, that's it. So the throw delays, like I'll normally just take, a little bit of like the last, section of a phrase, last word or something, and then, so it doesn't fight with the next thing, but it just fills this little bit of a gap, like if there's a gap, and normally I'll do it on all of them, but then often there's a few that like it won't need, but it's often just a good way of adding like audio interest to the overall thing, and I find like it works most of the time. Okay, and then vocal double, that comes in the chorus, in the verse it's single vocal, verse single vocal, chorus double.
It's the same in bad weather, gonna love you better.
And then we have Patty doubling my vocals.
When you can't leave me alone.
Patty just adds so much. Like it's just not a St. Lucia track without Patty. Here's her by herself. With a bit of Space Echo. And then harmonies.
To love you better. I'm untethered till you can't leave me alone, me alone, me alone.
It's a three-part harmony, and then there's another harmony that Patty did. It's like a high one, but it's turned down very low, actually. No, it's actually not in there, really. Oh, it comes in here.
Love you better.
Love you better. But it's very low because it just felt a bit kind of, I don't know, something weird. And then we have the na-na-nas, which is stacks of me and Patty doing na-na-na to have it feel like a gang of people in a way. And this is what that sounds like. That's just Patty. That's me. And this with Space Echo. And then here it gets harmonized. Yeah. And then some vocoder. Vocoder is also one of my favorite vocal effects. The most famous use, or like the one that I keep going back to, is "In the Air Tonight" by Phil Collins, where I think his whole vocal has this like vocoder behind it. And often I don't even use it as like an obvious vocoder. The vocoder I have is the Roland SVC 350, but I've also used the Electro-Harmonix V256 pedal a lot on a lot of the stuff that I've done, and I think it sounds comparable to the SVC 350, pretty close actually, way cheaper too. And it's just like a great vocal effect, you know, like if you listen here. You know, if I just play the lead vocal and that, you'll hear like...
And you had my mind, but I lost myself down across the borderline.
You know, in there, you don't even notice it's a vocoder, it's just like a chorus or something. Yeah, that is something I do a lot. And then there's a second vocoder that is just in the chorus, and this is like a plugin. I think it's a Softube vocoder. This is what it sounds like. And that's like more of an obvious vocoder that just pops in and out with the harmonies. And then we have the ooze in the post-chorus section. With some space echo. And that's it. That's the whole track. And then down here I have just like everything in reserve, like the MIDI and stuff that just hangs out down here. Sometimes I remember to hide it, sometimes I don't. That's how it goes. So yeah, that's Love You Better. There's, you know, a lot going on, as with pretty much every St. Lucia track. But that's it. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this run through Love You Better with me, Jean from St. Lucia, and hope to see you again soon.